we just felt we had to have quite a bit of mention about beavers. We had it in our first speaker today with the art and beavers can save us. There's nothing like, Felicity will tell us, there's nothing like the beaver bringing nature back. So on you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Maggie. Guys, thank you so much for being here. So, seeing is believing. My name is Felicity Jones. I'm a farmer. We farm up near Laddock, just outside, and we brought beavers back to our farm in 2017. This is in partnership with the Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and it's been absolutely fantastic. I've played witness to what beavers can do in the Cornish landscape. So, in terms of bringing them back across the county, it's starting to look really, really positive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So from nose to tail, I'm just going to give you a whistle-stop tour of the beaver physiology. Okay, so we'll go from the nose, eyes and ears. You can see they're basically on the same plane. So when beavers are swimming, if you see them in the wild, they'll be sort of on top of the water. You'll see the top of the nose, eyes and ears. And you might see them lifting their noses up out of the water like that, and that's to sort of sniff the air, see who you are, if you're going to eat them. These guys are prey animals, they get eaten by wolves, bears, mountain. So you've got two different types of beaver. Sorry, you've got the North American beaver and the Eurasian beaver. We have the Eurasian beaver, but mountain lions eat them. We haven't got any records of Siberian tigers eating them, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least because they do. So beavers and the tigers do inhabit the same location, okay? So that's probably happening. Now these guys these are herbivores, sorry. So lots of people think, oh, they eat fish. Actually, that's a lie. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis had the Mr. and Mrs. Beaver feed the children fish and chips. That's fake news, okay? They don't eat fish. So you can see also the little paws here, so they've got 5 digits just like us, and their hands are very, very dexterous. They don't have opposable thumbs, but when they're eating, they're stripping the bark off. So the bark of a tree is where all the sap is, essentially where all the sugars are. That's where the nutrition is. So they're stripping that bark off, and the lignin tissue, so the rings of the tree, if you like, that all gets used either as damming material, or it will just be abandoned as dead wood, or it'll go on top of their lodges. You can also see up here we've got beaver's hind paw. So you've got all the webbing between the paws, so that's what's really propelling them through the water. So you'll see a bit like a duck or some waterfowl, they'll be very still on top of the water, but those hind legs underneath are propelling them through, okay? So you're not hearing something very splashy or anything like that, it's very, very silent movement, but you'll see a proper V coming out the back just like you would with the duck. And you can also see they've got on their claws, so this is if you imagine you look at your feet, your big toes, that's what, essentially that's their positioning, they're split, okay, and they'll lift those hind legs up. I can't bend that way, but they'll use those hind legs to actually brush the hairs on their back, so they're constantly cleaning themselves, and same thing with the claws on their front paws as well, they'll be running them through the fur to keep that fur nice and clean. They also have an oil called castoreum, which is in their anal glands, okay? And it smells like vanilla, tastes like vanilla. Anyway, they'll use that oil to rub through their fur, okay? And that's what keeps them nice and waterproof. So their top fur, we call that the guard hairs, and then underneath is the very, very fine fluff. It's a bit like insulation. So they'll rub that oil through all their fur, and that's what's keeping them waterproof. So when they're swimming, these guys are operational all year round, so they don't hibernate. If they hibernated, their dams might break due to weather, and then they would be exposed to being eaten by other predators. So they're constantly working throughout the year. You'll sometimes see very comedic videos of them smashing their way up through some ice to then walk across the ice and then drop back into water. So this is all their nice fur here, and usually you see beavers in this chocolatey brown colour. You do get different pigments, like a proper black beaver or a albino beaver. And so this is our adult male of the first beaver that came, or one of the first beavers that came to Woodland Valley Farm. And you can see this big paddle of a tail just behind here. So this has a number of uses for beavers. Essentially, it's an extension of the spine. So they'll use it as a rudder in the water. Sometimes you'll see them turn on a 90-degree angle. They'll also use it as a communication tool, and they lift it on top of the water and make a big splash. It's like you do a belly flop at home or when you go to the beach or something. And that big splash communicates to beavers that might be trying to invade a territory, or they're just sort of passing through, but there is a resident beaver there and they're very fit and strong and you don't want to get into a fight. So wildlife doesn't want to get into big arguments, because those arguments can lead to fatal injuries. So if you think these guys, I haven't actually got a picture of their teeth here, which is a shame. They've got these really, really big incisors. Now they're red dentine instead of white dentine like ours. Their molars at the back are white dentine like ours, but these red, the iron, essentially what's making their teeth red, those incisors, is iron. And it makes it really, really hard. So that's how they can be chewing through hardwoods and softwoods. They're also rodents. So rodents, we all know, their teeth grow for their entire lives. So they have to wear them down, but because their teeth are very hard, they're sort of constantly sharpening them as they chew. So some people say they're self-sharpening. It's not quite like that, but as they chew, they keep them nice and sharp and ready to go and eat lots of different things. So come to the next one. Why did they go extinct? It's a very, very sad story. Essentially, people say in the UK, our last beaver, we believe, was shot here 400 years ago in Scotland. When we're thinking of beavers in Cornwall, because we had so much industry down here, we had lots of people down here, they likely went extinct here a little bit earlier than that. So you're sort of talking maybe 700 to 1,000 years ago. They're very tasty. They've also got this nice fur that we're talking about. So the oil they take out of their anal glands and they rub through their fur made them perfect for making beaver felt hats. And these ended up becoming really expensive. Not only that, you can see here, this looks a bit disgusting. This is the anal gland of a beaver. So this is where the castrum is kept. So we used to have vanilla ice cream that was flavoured by beaver, beaver anal glands. So you imagine you're eating beaver bum juice. Now, we also have pelts here. So again, the fashion at the time, if we're essentially, by the time, so 400 years ago, we lost them from the UK entirely. They were still across certain places in Eurasia, Russia, up here, a little bit in the Netherlands, in places where it was really, really difficult to get to. So places where fur trap was going, oh, that's a lot of work. Christopher Columbus went across and he landed in Central America. Anyway, so when he landed there, it was estimated that North America had 500 million beavers. Okay, so that's a lot of beavers. By the end of the 19th century, there were no known beavers left in the United States, and there were very few beavers left in northwest Canada. So essentially the fur trade crossed the Atlantic Ocean, as Europeans did, and then just went nuts. The same thing happened to bison. Wolves were eradicated in the 19th century. So, this kind of slaughter, across the Atlantic Ocean, that was a big thing. Until the fashion changed. Once the fashion changed, we went from having beaver hats to having silk hats. When we started having silk hats, the beavers were then given a reprieve because they're no longer worth the buying. But it was so crazy. You had a thing called the Canadian Beaver Wars. So there were French and English ships going up rivers in Canada, and they were, speaking to local tribes, going where are beavers, etc. And then there were fights, literal fights over this, because it was an economic boom. Now, why do we want to bring them back? They are really cute and cuddly. So that's kind of, they are really nice. They also do a huge amount for nature. So down here you can see, this is an aerial photo of a river or part of a river catchment in Devon. And so they've taken down some trees and created some deadwood habitat, which is rare because they flooded out the land. Now, the only time beavers actually kill a tree is if they flood the roots, which ends up killing the tree off. If they coppice a tree, so they'll take it, which coppicing is actually a really important ecological process. They'll take, sort of chop the tree a little bit comedically, so it looks a bit like a pencil top like this. They won't wait for the tree to fall down, because beavers can get flattened at that point, but the tree will end up on the floor. They'll eat, what they've done that for is so they can get to the canopy of the tree. So they'll eat the bark and they'll strip it back. They'll also take bigger branches, and they'll put them in their dams. okay, which they put the branches over the top of the dam, push up lots of silt and mud, which acts like cement, and then they'll put more branches over the top until the branches end up being built in with the sediment, and that essentially is what's holding it up. So they act like struts, if you like, okay, and then all that mud and silt builds up behind, leaf litter, etc. And they'll be consistently building these dams. So they never stop. They do get taller, but they're also doing lots of maintenance. So the water doesn't stop flowing because a beaver's built a dam. So what they are is leaky dams, okay? And also the water, fine. So you can see, there we go. So you can see here where you've got all this big build-up of water, the dam's over here. The water's finding different routes to move, okay? Which essentially means they've re-established the floodplain. So in the 19th century, we were really good at canalising rivers because we wanted to farm right up to the water. And that's where a lot of the fertile soil is, because you get a lot of sediment that runs off the hills actually being held up in these floodplains. Because you've taken the ability of the floodplain to work, so in the winter, the floodplain would form, it would stretch out over the land, the water would move a bit slower, and then it would, sort of meander down as it headed off to the ocean. By the Victorians draining them, we took all of this water and just sent it in a straight line all the way down to the ocean. Because of climate change, because of sea level rise, we've got this perfect storm now, sea level rise, increased rainfall in these big sort of, like yesterday, it didn't just come down nice and gently, it's just come in torrents. We've created the perfect conditions for flooding. And Cornwall, we're really, really unlucky. I know Helston deals with quite a lot of flooding issues, but also our local village of Laddock, it floods periodically, sort of every 10 years. In 2012 and 2013 it flooded each year consecutively, which is what caused us to start going, we need to start thinking about what we can do on our land to help alleviate flooding in Laddock. So Exeter University came in and they did a study, and they were looking at several things: temperature of the water coming in and out of the pond, coming in and out of the enclosure. So the enclosure's 200 metres long, so looking at the water coming in and the water leaving, and that was before the beavers and after the beavers had come. So you can see here, these little sort of blue dots at the top here, this is all rainfall events. So that's a pretty big rainfall event, etc., etc. And then you've got, this is blue line here, is the water coming in. So you can see it's kind of very, very steady until you get big peaks of rainfall, and there's lots of rainfall coming in, and then that suddenly peters off. And then the red line is the water leaving. Now, before the beavers were here, these lines pretty much mirrored each other. So water comes in really quick and then leaves really quick. Now, because the water still comes in really quick, but because we have 5 lengths of dam, it takes much longer for the same amount of water to actually leave, and some of it's also retained. So instead of it going, the water coming in and leaving within 5 minutes, it now takes 45 minutes to an hour. And that margin makes a big difference. Now, this is only on 2% of the Laddock water catchment, so we really need beavers on 20-30% of the Laddock water catchment to make sense. We can also see over here, now this is a picture from Dartmoor, I think it was 2018, where Dartmoor ended up being on fire. We obviously had a really, really dry summer. Now, beavers, they can't stop fires happening, but they can create wildfire breaks. So you'll also see pictures from California, where you've got beaver habitat, and then the land will be scorched on both sides of the beaver habitat, but there is still a wet oasis in the middle, and that's because fire cannot burn water. Okay, so not only that, but also we've got a major water quality issue across the country. None of our rivers in the UK are considered good ecological status or clean. So having beavers, essentially, now it's not that the dams are actually filtering the water, but by creating these ponds, the water coming in loses its speed, okay? And when it loses its speed, it can't carry all that sediment anymore. And those big particulates also have nitrates and phosphates. So what happens is, these big particulates fall out to the bottom of the pond and they land in the mud and silt at the bottom. That also acts as a carbon store. So it's also sequestering and holding on to lots of carbon. And so the water leaving the ponds ends up being cleaner. So you can see here, Exeter also did the study. They found that above the beaver dams, you had more milligrams versus below the beaver dams. So the mandate for bringing beavers back to Cornwall, particularly because we've got these deep river valleys, is really, really high. I would say in places where the land is so flat, or places like Rutland where we've actually man-made the water to be higher than the land itself, and we're farming a lot of arable crops there for human consumption, it's probably not the best idea to be putting beavers there, purely because they will drill through a bank and then flood, say, 50 acres of carrots in about 10-15 minutes. You're going to have a very unhappy farmer who will, you know, well within their rights to go mad and say, why have you brought beavers back here? I'm just going to go out and shoot them. Really sad, that shouldn't be happening, but we can avoid that catastrophe altogether if we think about it a little bit smartly. But on the on the western side of the UK, it makes complete sense because we have got these massive hilly habitats. Does that all make sense? Excellent. So, what is the big picture? So Cornwall Beaver Project is a partnership with Woodland Valley Farm and Cornwall Wildlife Trust. This here is a beaver dam capacity map, or model, sorry, that was created by Exeter University. They're looking at all the different rivers and tributaries across the county and where beavers could be making dams and, you know, carving out lives for themselves. Now, it also, now this is not to say beavers should be everywhere through here, because again, there will be management concerns on, you know, and there'll be different stakeholders say, actually, I've got this specific rare tree here that I don't want the beavers to eat. Okay, we can fix that, etc., etc. But Cornwall Council had this commissioned by Exeter University as part of the nature recovery strategy. So take the Lizard here, you've got several rivers which could be full of beavers having a nice time, making a lot of sense for a lot of people. Now, what I will say is they can't stop sea level rise, that's down to climate change, it's on us. And they cannot stop sewage outfalls, I don't think. We don't know their interaction with sewage yet. I'm sure it would be very good for them, as it's not very good for us, and they're also mammals. So I think, you know, sewage is on us, we have to get that fixed somehow. Let's speak to the water company. Thank you very much for listening. And any questions?
Why can I go and see some beavers in the wild? Is it something just outside farming where they go to release beavers?
Where can she see beavers?
Yeah. So you can come to us at the Cornwall Beaver Project. So we host walks through Cornwall Wildlife Trust on Wednesday evenings, and then we do Thursday evenings throughout the summer holidays, or we do we're launching Beaver Barbecue events this year, which doesn't include actual beavers. We're not counting beavers. Right, yes.
But Felicity, lady asked in the wild. Where can you see them in the wild?
Okay, so
Thank you.
that's right. No, if you go up to the River Otter, the river in Devon, the River Tamar, there are beavers there. You want to be careful about going on, making sure you're obviously not going onto private land, because obviously we do have trespass down here. In Scotland as well, on Tayside, so the River Tay does have beavers. There is a little bit of conflict there with farmers and beavers, however, because again, like I said earlier, the land is quite flat there. Yes?
I mean, for those approaches, just outside farmer, where there's a water and they have it, because my daughter says zoology and basically university, those encourages animals to be beavers.
Is there a project near farm that's linked to Exeter University?
So we have links with Exeter University, so they come up to us and come for, conference days basically, where we show them around the farm, but also including the Beaver Project. So that could be it. Also, Week, so the Seal Sanctuary also have, or they did have beavers, they've now been reintroduced onto the Foy. Sorry, you could also go onto the Foy catchment, sorry, they're on the Parr catchment now, they should be reintroduced to the Foy quite soon. Gosh, and you've got, it's getting confusing, you've got Helm and Tor have got beavers as well, so there are plenty of places you can go and see them. Whether you see them or not, because they're obviously nocturnal. Yes?
You say that
beavers wouldn't be welcome in some places where there's banked rivers and so forth,
Yeah, yeah.
and I get that. How are you going to stop them?
So essentially we're going to have a really good management system. In Germany and Bavaria, they've got a really good management system there.
So do you herd them back?
No. So if you, essentially it depends what the issue is. If the issue is, they're trying to dam a culvert and they're going to flood out a road, this is not good. We could put in what we call a water levelling device or beaver deceiver.
Oh,
And that's a pipe that goes through the dam with a cage on the side of the water, okay, so they can't dam it. We've got one at home that we have basically put there to show farmers that, you know, this is an option if you need it for whatever reason, or any other stakeholders who think they need it. Also, protecting your trees, a mix of PVA glue and sand, it's like eating a salty sandwich, they won't chew through that up to 1 metre high all the way around the tree. Also, just a metal tree guard, you do have to update those obviously though, as the tree gets bigger, you get fascias kind of opening up. But yeah, so you've got options in management.
So
if they need to be translocated, so if they're in a situation where they end up in Rutland, let's say, that is a case of, okay, we need to trap and put them in a place where it would actually make sense to have them. And then worst case scenario in Bavaria, they do use lethal control. But if we get to a point where we've got so many, then it will be a case of going, okay, we're going to have to make that decision. We are way away from
We
that.
have to bring the hats back into fashion.
Yeah.
I have a particular interest in the River Cober.
Yeah.
Now, the River Cober has been the site of mining for a long, long time, and there's all sorts of stamps and spoil along the river edge.
Yeah.
My concern is if beavers get onto the Cober,
Yeah.
which they will do,
Yeah.
because they're becoming a wild animal in Britain, and probably so be it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not going to be a danger to the beavers themselves, in that they're going to be delving and leaching mining spoil from, and also, isn't that also going to damage plants that are around?
So, I can't speak to the plants because I'm not a botanist.
No.
What I would say is, so in our area anyway, we know arsenic is a big deal in the soil. Now, thus far, the beavers have been there since 2017, and they have not had issues that we know of with arsenic. Now, that's not to say that maybe a few years down the line or whatever, actually it turns out arsenic does, because they're damming and they're moving soil around and so forth, that arsenic doesn't become an issue. But if you think of the beaver dam as slowing up all that sediment, it's not that they're going around and digging through it or whatever. They might dig a burrow as in, to make their lodge, so they have an underwater entrance up into the lodge and then they'll roof it with sticks, etc. But they're not, mining the soil, if you like. So I don't think it would have...
Into the
Yeah, but if they're, so because arsenic leaches in, let's say, so like all the other chemicals I was talking about, like glyphosate, nitrates, etc., that might enter the water column, because they've built a pond, it slows it down, so all those harmful components come out and land in the bottom of the pond in all of that silt. Essentially, I don't think it would be a massive issue, but again, I think there's actually science to look at that though. There are different studies going on continuously.
Because we drink the Cober. Water comes out of Wendron treatment plants.
Yeah.
So if the beavers get in above the Wendron treatment plant, there could be some issues.
I couldn't say yes or no,
Fine,
because
put me
I
on the
don't.
spot.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, I don't completely know myself.
No.
What I would say is if you've got farmers farming up there as well, or you've got cattle or whatever, they're going to be taking, sewage and spoil out of
I test the water in the Cober.
Yeah,
so I know
yeah.
about that.
We better stop actually.
Just one.
Do it really quick.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
quite simple. Where we've got releases so far, are they all fenced? What would happen if the fence, or can we have no fences?
Okay, so long story short, we're essentially going to try and go for a license to get beavers across the whole of Cornwall, because it just makes sense for us here.
Yeah.
It truly does. Obviously with mitigation in for farmers, etc. There will no longer be fenced releases of beavers. So you could not get Natural England now to give you a licence for an enclosure. It's just not going to happen. Natural England and DEFRA, they have put beavers in the Environment Agency's toolkit for natural flood management. So beavers are going to be coming back native. Now you can go for a wild release licence, so that's what Cornwall Wildlife Trust have just gone and got on the Foy and the Par. But we're still, it's a very difficult, hard process. So you must write to your MP and say, why is this so difficult? But there will be no more fences going on.
I think I'm going to ask you your thoughts, but I think what this is all telling me is that we need a lot more education about beavers, and I think we're going to try and play our part, get Felicity back, give a talk or two, and really try and raise people's knowledge about what is, as we've said today, going to be a new wild animal that we live alongside. Okay, well, thank you very much.